Welcome everybody, welcome iedereen, bonjour à chacun. As you know, English will be the language of this evening, and I'm very pleased to welcome you in this first event, public event organized by the Collegium of the Royal Academy of Belgium. Of course, you know, all the evening will be in English. It's a necessity to be international, and science is international, and we must insist on this. And English is the Latin of modern times. But I have also to insist on the necessity to remain multilinguistic. And that's also the reason why I will switch in French, because I suspect that everybody is speaking French or at least understands French. And so it will be a way to defend this multilinguistic approach. And mostly for social sciences and humanities. Et donc, en 2022, pour célébrer ses 250 ans d'existence, l'Académie royale de Belgique a décidé de créer une nouvelle institution, le Collegium. Vous le voyez à l'écran. Collegium, comme son nom l'indique, est une compagnie, un collège, en fait de 40 membres à terme, parce que pour l'instant, ils ne sont encore que 16. Et ces 16-là, qui ont été élus par les académiciens, ont élu à leur tour 8 nouveaux membres qui seront reçus à l'Académie le 16 décembre de cette année. Ils seront donc 24, et puis 32, et puis 40, enfin, là, ce sera le régime de croisière. Ces jeunes membres de l'Académie, ils ont nécessairement moins de 40 ans au moment où ils sont élus, et ils ne restent en fonction, ils ne restent membres de ce collégium que durant 5 ans. Mais je peux vous assurer qu'ils sont tous extraordinairement brillants. Ils ont déjà, même s'ils n'ont pas encore atteint 40 ans, ils ont déjà des carrières fantastiques. Et à voir leur nom et leur discipline, vous avez une petite idée de la variété de leurs talents. Ces 40 membres, à terme, ils seront, et ils sont déjà, pour les 16 premiers, rattachés aux 4 classes de l'Académie. Donc il y en aura 10 par classe, la classe des sciences, la classe des lettres et des sciences morales et politiques, la classe des arts et la classe technologie et société. Et c'est ainsi que dans ce collégium, vous avez à la fois des juristes, des cantatrices, des historiens de l'art, des physiciens, des chimistes, des mathématiciens, enfin j'en oublie, bref, toutes les disciplines qui concernent, ou qui sont concernées plus exactement par l'Académie royale de Belgique. Et c'est ce collégium qui a décidé d'organiser son premier événement public. Et pour qu'il soit très public, ils ont choisi une magnifique salle, ce fameux Studio 4 qui peut vous accueillir tous. Et nous sommes vraiment tous très très heureux de vous voir nombreux ce soir pour traiter d'un problème important, un problème qui est aussi fortement à l'agenda de l'Académie royale de Belgique, puisque l'intelligence artificielle, comme on dit parfois, va donner lieu dans quelques semaines à une publication grand public pour essayer d'en aborder certains points. Elle est à l'agenda des discussions de classe. Elle a fait l'objet aussi d'une séance publique de la classe technologie et société il y a quelques jours. Donc, c'est un point extrêmement important pour l'Académie, pour le Collegium. Et je suis vraiment très très heureux que les 16 premiers membres aient élu ce thème pour cette première manifestation publique il y en aura d'autres, mais je vais maintenant céder la parole à sa directrice, peut-être à son co-directeur, je ne sais pas, à sa directrice, Mireille HOUAYEK, qui va vous expliquer le déroulement de la soirée et les buts qui sont recherchés. So, Mireille, the floor is yours, and I wish you an excellent evening. Thank you.
So welcome, everyone. I will be very brief so we can start the evening. I just want to welcome you to this first edition of what I hope will be many editions of Beyond Boundaries, where the Collegium hopes to bring together artists and scientists on society issues or issues that are interesting in the society. So our first edition, as the Secrétaire perpétuel just said, is about artificial intelligence. And tonight, we are going to have 3 speakers that are going to address very different avenues of artificial intelligence than you would expect. This is not going to be about what is artificial intelligence or how does it work, but more about how it affects our societies, either in politics, how are we going to use laws to try to govern artificial intelligence, and also we will be hearing a musical performance around artificial intelligence, well, actually with artificial intelligence in the composition. So I just want to say that one of our musical interventions for tonight is canceled because Artemie Maria Jyoti is unfortunately sick, but we will have still another intervention. For tonight, we will not have questions after each of the presentations, but we will have a debate at the end with questions from the public if you would have any, and our 3 speakers will be here ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Good evening. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Antoinette Rouvroy from the University of Namur. So Antoinette is Doctor of Laws of the European University Institute in Firenze and FNRS Research Associate at the University of Namur. In her writings, she has addressed issues of privacy, data protection, non-discrimination, equality of opportunities, due process in the context of data-rich environments, the so-called genetic revolution, and the so-called computational turn, with an approach combining both legal and political philosophy. Our current interdisciplinary research interests revolve around what she has called algorithmic governmentality. Under this Foucauldian neologism, she explores the semiotic, epistemic, political, legal, and philosophical implications of the computational turn. And so she will give a talk tonight about AI and law, 2 ways of straddling the ungovernable. So Antoinette, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I thank very much the Collegium for their very intimidating invitation to speak to you today. Nowadays, data-drivenness or artificial intelligence is presented as the key to the intelligence, efficiency, responsiveness, agility, leanness of almost everything. Social networks, telephones, watches, televisions, fridges, heating systems, homes, cars, workplace, cities, commercial and political marketing, police and law enforcement, fraud detection, governments. With what Claudia Arado calls the AI common sense, the question whether AI, artificial intelligence, is indeed appropriate at all becomes almost unthinkable as asking it would interrupt the move towards more digital technology, more data, more interoperability, and more AI. The ubiquitous injunction today, the ubiquitous requirement, is no longer so much to opt for AI as to adapt to AI or to convert to it. The 2022 Oxford Insights Government AI Readiness states it in its very title. It's not a matter of choosing AI. It's a matter of getting ready for government, getting ready for AI. In Europe, this imperative to adapt to AI innovations is explicitly proclaimed in the very title of, for example, the white paper on artificial intelligence, a European approach to excellence and trust, published by the European Commission in 2020. It reflects, in particular, the growing influence of the innovation principle in a European growth model strategically combining climate and ecological transition and digital transition. The new European growth model within an ethical and green digital capitalism converts the prospects of climate, ecological, social, and psychic collapse into promises of resilience, infinite growth, and increased social well-being. This twinning of the green and digital transitions is a good illustration, I think, of the contemporary articulation between, on the one hand, an acute awareness of the instability and invincible complexity and uncertainty of the biophysical world, and, on the other hand, an almost blind faith in the capacity of learning machines to mitigate the implications of radical contingency and instability, or even to convert contingency and instability into growth. There is a faith in the ability of learning machines to metabolize big and fast data as to manage the implications of this radical uncertainty or complexity. In fact, Frederick Jameson had already in 2020 noticed that today, instead of utopian texts, we have the free trade delirium of the cyberpunks who assume that capitalism is itself a kind of utopia of difference and variety. There is that assumption that computers are enough to take care of totalization, that the infinite complexities of global production, which the mind can barely accommodate, are mysteriously solvable in the black box of the computer. And that it is therefore no longer necessary at all to deal with them on a conceptual or representational level. In fact, contrary to what is often claimed, the traction gained by the idea of an algorithmic governmentality depends on a complete reversal of the deterministic idea that the world and social phenomena and the world's inhabitants are governed or governable either by predictable, detectable regularities or by social physics, and that in fact human behaviors, among other things, would be measurable or calculable in reference to an average or a normal law. As Luigi Pellizzoni and many others have argued, in fact, today, not only has the unforeseeable taken a growing role in human affairs, but such role is undergoing an evaluative inversion, being increasingly conceived as an opportunity rather than as a problem. Speculation and leveraging of uncertainty, which is also called resilience just in time and not surveillance, is what is at the core of governmental rationality in neoliberalism on algorithmic steroids. With the advent of big data and machine learning, emergences are detected in real time in an anomic, complex, purely metric digital space, a space envisaged not from the topological angle of continuity and stability, but from the time-based angle of contingency, instability, and continuously reconduced crisis. Whereas data function as pure difference or deferment of meaning that is never given in its completion. Thus, as I said, algorithmic governmentality appears symptomatic of a total reversal of the deterministic idea that social phenomena are governed by predictable, detectable, governable regularities, and that indeed human behaviors are predictable. No, the reason why there is a demand for AI to take over the governance of complexity is precisely because we have renounced to understand what happens in terms of statistical regularities, in terms of scientific laws. Rather, recurring to big data and algorithms is really a way of waiving the ambitions of prediction, including predictions of behaviors, and rather embracing the agile management of radical unpredictability. The speculative ambitions of machine learning are really at odds with the mid-19th century ambitions of studying social physics, like Adolf Kettler called it, whose project was to study man in his various degrees of aggregation from the individual state to the highest state of combination, which includes the whole of humanity. On the contrary, algorithmic governmentality, and which is allowed by machine learning, radically embraces uncertainty, incommensurability, and contingency. It also attests to a new mode of preemptive intervention, which is no longer legitimized or justified as the ability to act on the basis of precise knowledge of the future, but on the contrary, as an invincible certainty as to what must be done in the absence of such uncertainty, in a temporality that becomes recursive, in a dynamic mode where continuous learning and production of reliabilities without truth replace the production of temporary truth and their justifiability, verifiability, and contestability. It is as if algorithmic governmentality always had metabolized both the epistemic and ideologic critique in advance through the continuous overcoming of its own systems of difference, of orders of magnitude or valuations, metrics, weights, patterns. Algorithms themselves have become absolutely plastic. That is, through what is called learning or agility. Does an autonomous vehicle cause death? That's not really a problem that should interrupt the deployment of innovation. On the contrary, errors must be made for the intelligent systems to learn. Does an algorithmic decision-making mistakenly deprive a person from welfare benefits? Then things become much more complicated. The algorithmic system isn't equipped to hear about the singular situation of a person. It only knows about data and further observations of data will not allow it to learn about its own unknown unknowns. Algorithmic governmentality and the adaptive computation structures it relies on, neural networks, for example, emulate and generalize contemporary financialized capitalism's tendency to absolutize contingency. In a way, algorithmic governmentality amounts to cynicism, acquiescence to a power structure that is both politically and morally unjustifiable. So, you see, that's what I mean here is that in a democracy, the problem with AI is not so much, as is often stated, the opacity of algorithmic black boxes. The problem is rather the disavowal of the epistemic and ontological opacity or indetermination of the world in itself, or the denial of that part of interior or the facets of materiality, life, human existence, thought, that cannot be described, predicted, or decided by means of digital computation. In other words, the part of indeterminacy, epistemic or ontological, that obliges us, humans, to produce collectively through artificial representations, institutions, conventions, deliberations, political conflict, law, a reality capable of straddling indeterminacy, and through this, ideally, of doing justice to experience, insofar as experience cannot be deduced from a mass of digital data or from any state of affairs. In fact, people could say, whoa, you are paranoid. But I'm not paranoid. In fact, machine learning algorithms are really paranoid. These machines are the paranoiacs. Why? In fact, when the slightest signal, digital signal, the slightest piece of digital data becomes potentially meaningful, when no digital signal is excluded a priori as noise, in a universe where facts and effects are gradually becoming radically indissociable, where any digital data transpiring from even our most trivial behaviors can earn us a high-risk score or a bad social credit score, faced with the paranoid structure of algorithmic semiosis, it may become difficult to uphold what Samuel Beckett's assertion, he said in 1953, no symbols were none intended. The problem is not the lack of meaning. It's not that algorithms don't produce meaning. It's rather the opposite. There is an excess of meaning. As shown, for example, by Mercedes Bunz, she says, interestingly, machine learning models seem to escape the scheme of enslavement through producing irritations on two levels. First, performing a calculation of meaning, they are not devoid of signification. Second, producing interesting errors, they fail to be fully domesticated. It seems that the technology of machine learning models might be more rebellious than other technologies, as they signify like hell and often deny to be always of service or to camouflage themselves as nothing but human intelligence. What appears threatening in this algorithmic semiosis, production of sense, is also what appears politically seductive at first sight. The short-circuiting of human language and of scientific language in particular, which, according to Horkheimer and Adorno, scientific language, which in its impartiality removes from all that is without power the possibility of expressing itself. Only that which exists is given a neutral sign, say Horkheimer and Adorno. All this doing away, emancipating rationality from the yoke of representation and language, appear to allow, at last, that everything become potentially signifying, even and especially what was perceived before as non-signifying, pre-semiotic in the regimes of representation, including statistical representation. And there is that impression that the system therefore shifts the frontiers and thresholds of perception to include a quantity of elements, digital signals, pre-semiotic and infrasemiotic, giving voice and weight to what previously remained outside of all kinds of representation, and virtually pushing back to infinity the limits of representability, and abolishing in the same gesture, by abolishing its outside, abolishing representation itself. Although the very possibility of representation and interpretation, the very thing through which human beings normally gain access to reality, seems singularly short-circuited or abolished. Erich Hall suggests that what characterizes the contemporary phase in the history of semiotics is perhaps less the end of meaning in favor of the mathematical, logical, technical exploitation of signals as pure signals, independent of any meaning, any signification, and therefore the appearance of a new techno-ecological formation of meaning emerging in the shadow of the supposed end of meaning. The new digital techniques undoubtedly give access to or produce a different, alien meaning that is no longer attested or attestable alphabetically by a transcendental subject of reading and writing. So, in the wake of the massive conferences on cybernetics between 1946 and 1953, and the invention of system theories to which Bateson, McCulloch, Wiener, and von Neumann contributed, a new theoretical model of everything, of biological, mechanical, and communicational processes had already emerged that had stripped humans and Homo sapiens of any privileged position in the production of meaning, information, and cognition. Catherine Hiles, for example, defining cognition as a process of interpreting information in contexts that connect it with meaning, argued that although many biosemiotics argue that computers cannot create meaning because they are not autonomous, this objection is an arbitrary limitation belied by what computers actually do. As far as I know, she continues to write, no computational media are conscious. Nevertheless, like non-conscious organisms, computers have internal and external milieus. They process and interpret information, including information from sensors and actuators, when these things are present, and they create meaning in the sense of performing behaviors that have efficacy within their environment. Because cognition is inherently embodied, making these claims does not obscure or avoid the fact that computational media have profound different instantiations, that is, bodies, than do biological organisms, nor does it imply that computers operate like brains or vice versa. All this to say that indeed, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or what Elena Esposito rather calls artificial communication, in order to avoid the misunderstanding that machines are indeed intelligent in the way humans are. All this, in fact, generate an alien kind of meaning, but that should not replace completely nor render completely obsolete our human way of producing meaning. This is especially true because there are a lot of blind spots. Machines have a lot of blind spots. They are not able to compute what is not computable. And what is not computable? One very important thing, which is not yet a thing that is not computable, is really the future. The future, by which I mean the interest of people of the future, of those who come after us and who have not yet left any kind of any digital data that could be metabolized by artificial intelligence. I mean that artificial intelligence and machine learning can only metabolize data that has been collected, that has been produced and collected, and which reflect the past. But the future remains absolutely in the blind spot. That's the reason why, in fact, despite the fact that nowadays lawyers are rather obsessed with regulation, I believe that the true problems of artificial intelligence are not problems of regulation. They are problems of constitution. They are by constitution. Why do I speak of constitution? Because I think that the problem is rather to manage, to keep open the space and time to define collectively the criteria of merit, need, desirability, acceptable dangerousness, presiding over the distribution of resources and opportunities. I mean, defining the contours of a theory of justice that cannot be put in charge or transferred to algorithms, to decide how we are calculated, rather than subcontracting the determination of these criteria to algorithms. Why I speak of constitution is also because what matters for us if we want to remain in democracy is to keep in mind that a society is principally, I would say, a matter of institutional invention. What matters is to decide collectively in situation of undecidability and in situation of uncertainty, while taking into account, indeed, what has not left any digital trace, the future. I would follow Mark Fisher's invitation. We must build a critique on the basis of a future, not on the basis of the past, not a nostalgic critique for concepts, for causality and so on, but on the basis of a future, for the sake of a future that has not yet arisen. Third, I think we need a constitution for the digital, a constitution for the age of AI, in order to limit the powers of the new techno-feudal lords. By limitation, I mean we need limitation and separation of power. And a constitutional text is precisely a text wherein powers decide and sign and engage themselves to self-constrain, to self-limit. I have argued that algorithmic governmentality is not about directing human behaviors according to norms imposed from above, by state and other authorities, but rather a way of granting those whom, for example, Mackenzie work calls vectorialist class, a lawless force, a power to govern without norms, while guaranteeing the survival of the state in forms that are no longer quite those of the state, while remaining state at the same time. As Pierre Macheret writes, governmentality has succeeded in penetrating everything, algorithmic governmentality including. It's a devious phenomenon. And it has guaranteed the survival of the state in forms that are no longer quite those of the states, while still being all the same. So I think we need a constitution also, an institution. We have to think in terms of institutions, in the sense that David Hume attributed, or the role that David Hume attributed to institutions. For David Hume, the problem is not the egoism, and we know that optimization and the possibility of optimizing utilities of individuals through personalization of contents and so on, may serve egoism rather than opening individuals to the questions of common goods. But the problem is not the egoism, but the partiality of natural sympathies. So the whole point for David Hume was not to limit egoism or natural rights, but to move beyond limited sympathies, families, friends, friends, and so on, towards a broader generosity. The challenge is to stretch the passions, to give them an extension that they do not have on their own. So I think indeed that if machines, as Canguilhem says, machines are able to products of calculation, they can verify norms of calculation, rational norms of identity, consistency and predictions, whereas the living organism, but I would say society as a living organism, acts and behaves according to empiricism. Life is experience, that is to say, improvisation, the use of occurrences. It is an attempt in every sense. Hence the fact, which is both massive and often overlooked, that life tolerates monstrosities. There is no such thing as a monster machine. There is no mechanical pathology, as Bichat pointed out in his Anatomie générale appliquée à la physiologie et à la médecine. While monsters are still living beings, there is no distinction between the normal and the pathological in physics and mechanics. There is a distinction between the normal and the pathological within living beings. And I would say that the fundamental question, and we know that for example, justice, because justice is dialectic, and because it's dialectic, it can produce monsters. It can produce completely unprecedented transformations of societies and probably desirable bifurcations. So I will leave you with a fundamental question that remains. Is it not because the deliberative model of democracy based on citizenship and the impersonal value of the common good are both being called into question today as the rational basis for any ordering of the social, and because the only foundation that is imagined to be sufficiently solid to support the institution of anything like a social contract is an optimization model, that on the one hand, the transition from actuarial society calculating risks to a post-actuarial society is considered as almost inevitable, and that on the other hand, interpersonal differences in propensities, including propensities to irrationality, to credulity, and so on, in high digital resolution, which is also high social dissolution, are so passionately studied. And I leave you with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoinette Rouvroy, for this very insightful talk that we will have the chance to discuss afterwards. Good evening, everyone. It's now my pleasure to introduce the second speaker of this evening, Olga Kisseleva, who wears, interestingly, this dual hat as an artist and a researcher. Mathematician by training, she's been interested in artificial intelligence since the 90s, and she now teaches contemporary art at the Sorbonne University of Paris. She is the head of the Art and New Media program and the founding director of the Art&Science International Institute. She also contributes to various projects, including Culture IA at the CNRS. She also, and through her work and using digital media, various digital artistic media, Olga Kisseleva questions a world dominated by new technologies, as well as the place of intellectual thinking, but also artistic practices in postmodern capitalist societies where formatting tends to prevail over individuality. Her work is internationally acknowledged with exhibition at the National Center for Contemporary Art in Moscow, the Modern Art Museum in Paris, the Chiasma in Helsinki, the Consortium in Dijon, the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, just to cite a few. And she's also represented in various biennales, including Venice, Istanbul, Dakar, Tirana, Rennes, and Moscow. And last but not least, Olga's works are also present in many of the world's most important art collections, including the Centre Pompidou, the Louis Vuitton Foundation, the Moscow Museum of Modern Art, and the MoMA in New York. Tonight, Olga Kisseleva will be speaking about her work that involves AI, actually long before this technology was considered a fully fledged artistic tools. And this evening, just so you know, you will have also the chance to appreciate one of his seminal work, Power Struggle, a video projection that exhibits a live battle between 4 antivirus programs. But I will say no more, and we warmly invite you after the conference, so during the reception, to discover this piece in the foyer. So Olga, thank you so much for being with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this invitation and for this very generous introduction. So I will try to how to move the sorry. Yes, it works. Yeah. So I will give you a few examples of artwork using artificial intelligence before it became officially an artistic tool and all artists became crazy about it. So this work was first presented at the Tate Modern in 2011. But I was working on since the very beginning of 21st century. And this is the work we actually have presented now in Flagey, and you will be able to interact with it after the conference. So what you see on the screen, it is a battle of 4 computer viruses. Each one is represented by a color. The colors are, it is not like kind of political or aesthetical choice. The colors comes from the famous picture painting of Kazimir Malevich, called Red Cavalry because it was the main artwork of the exhibition in Tate Modern called Red Cavalry. When you empty your computer and you put inside 4 viruses, each one is trying to exterminate the others and to take the whole space of the computer. So each byte of the space of computer disk occupied by a virus is represented by a color which is associated to this virus. And you will be really able to see on the screen how they progress. And what is interesting, the comportment of these viruses, which are in fact intelligent agents created and programmed by human, the comportment is exactly the one described in the game theory as a typical comportment of human in conflict situation. This work, it is not only a projection, it is also a performance. For each battle, I invited a specialist, a scientist, or specialist of politics, a doctor, a lawyer, economist, and I asked this partner to make a commentary of the battle like if it was something happened in his area. So in the projection here, you will see the small QR code moving across the screen. Please catch them, and you will have a conference, a performance by a famous historian, scientist, artist, philosopher, etc., in your own phone. You can bring it home. So what we have here, it is installation and performance at the same time. So this is a very easy, in fact, a very, very simple example how the artificial intelligence interact with art and sometimes with the society. Since I was working with viruses since the beginning of the 21st century, during the pandemic, I was especially very interested by viruses. The whole world was contaminated. So I was invited in Hôpital Cochin in Paris, which was the main place to study the COVID and also to take care of people who got COVID. And I worked with the medical team, but also with the specialist of artificial intelligence to create a computer virus which has the same comportment than COVID viruses. Then we produced this artwork called Antibody. We scanned in 3D a sculpture of, or maybe we can show the video. We have a video about this project. It will be more clear. So we scanned the sculpture of 17th century of Jean-Denis Cochin, the founder of the hospital, and the file was infected with the computer virus we created for this experience. Then the file changed the form, and we got different stage of the infection of this illness. On each stage, we stopped the contamination, and we printed a 3D sculpture like a portrait of the person modified by the virus. Then we created an antivirus, which was similar to the antiviruses which was created to fight against COVID. And we took care of this file to make it clean without the virus. Then we also printed a different stage of this cleaning, and we got the file after COVID. Now you can see how the change happened, and what is interesting, the final sculpture was not at all the same like the first one. It was like a kind of modelization. We produced it thanks to artificial intelligence, which shown us how the body can be modified by the virus and how it was modified by COVID. What is especially interesting in this example is the difference with the first one, which was only using mathematics. This one across the swarm intelligence, the intelligence of nature, which is represented by COVID virus, and artificial intelligence. And all this pandemic was, in fact, a very good example which show us how the swarm intelligence, the intelligence of nature, is stronger than the mathematical machines one. Probably we can go back to the slides and stop the video. Yeah, so the next example I would like to speak, it is the Eden project. I'm developing since 15 years, which was presented in like about 20 biggest museum of the world. And it is a project with swarm intelligence, intelligence of nature. And we use it as tools of aesthetic, help it with artificial intelligence, but we use it also as a tool to help nature and to save spaces and even to reintroduce, recreate and reintroduce disappeared spaces. The very new branch of this Eden project, we developed it with a European community last year. And we created a special green index formula. Can we show the next video, please? The green index formula, which was presented in the European Parliament and which is about to be introduced now in European law. And this formula helps to optimize the planting of trees across the city. It helps to preserve the nature present in the city. Because As you can see on this example, which is an example of city of Karlsruhe, but we are planning to make one also for Brussels very soon. The city naturally is an arborescent structure. The city planification naturally is based on the swarm intelligence and the intelligence of nature. And when people move across the city in the streets, it is like liquids is moving across the tree, across these branches, and bring the life in different parts of the street. So when we don't respect this arborescent structure, the city have a problem, like a tree can have a problem when liquids don't go in different branches. And if people in the city don't go in different area, then we have some dangerous and even dead areas in the cities. So crossing swarm intelligence and artificial intelligence, we created this kind of modelization for different cities across Europe to planify how to maintain the nature in the city and how to develop city according to these natural laws to keep them alive. Let's go to the 2 slides. And this is a very new project, which is, you are the first person who heard about it. It doesn't exist for the moment. It is a project we just started to work on. It is a walking opera called Stalker, like a famous film by Andrei Tarkovsky. In this opera, which will be presented in different places across France, with the premiere in 2024 in Cathédrale de Rouen for the Festival Normandie Impressionniste. We work on this opera with Institut Pasteur in Paris to make a modelization of a kind of narrow system which will represent the strange zone, the theme of the opera, and viewers have to cross to be initiated with the intelligence, a new kind of intelligence which was apported on the earth by strangers, according to Tarkovsky's story. So I hope it will be a new research which will bring new experience and new ideas, not only in art and culture, but also in mathematics and neuroscience, and in what we call the study of artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for this beautiful presentation. Now, using their 4 hands and a piano, but also synthesizers, organs, and controllers, Julien Libeer and Vincent Caers explore the dark side of Bach and Bartók's piano scores. Here, tradition and experimentation are united within an impressive world of sounds, which immerse the listener into dark landscapes, hushed beauty, and explosive electronics. Following the French suite in G by Bach and the suite for piano by Bartók as a guide, the two performers explore a vast universe where familiarity and obscurity alternate. With Umbraphonics, one takes a glance at the sun while visiting the dark side of the moon. Umbraphonic performances use algorithmic processes that expand the musical score into other scenic territories. This results in a dialogue between musician and machine, leading to completely new interpretations offered by modern technology. Julien Libeer and Vincent Caers, the floor is yours.
Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce our last speaker, but not least, before the debate. So César Hidalgo is a Chilean Spanish-American scholar known for his contributions to economic complexity, data visualization, and applied artificial intelligence. He holds a PhD in physics from the University of Notre Dame, and he's the author of dozens of peer-reviewed scientific papers, 3 books, and has received several awards. Between 2010 and 2019, he led the MIT's Collective Learning Group, and prior working at MIT, he was a research fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He is also a founder of DataWheel, an award-winning company specialized in the creation of data distribution and visualization systems. He currently leads the Center for Collective Learning at the Artificial and Natural Intelligence Institute of the University of Toulouse and the Corvinus Institute for Advanced Studies at Corvinus University of Budapest. He is also an honorary professor at the University of Manchester. César Hidalgo, my pleasure to introduce you.
The weekend of October 18, 2019 changed Chilean history. What started on a Thursday as a few student protests for a small raise in subway prices quickly escalated into full-scale riots. By Saturday, we woke up to a country in which more than 50 subway stations had been burned or damaged. By Sunday, many supermarkets had been razed, they had been burned, and they had been looted. A week that had started like any other had ended like no week in Chilean history, with the beginning of a curfew for the first time since Pinochet's government. So that was an incredibly stressful time for all Chileans, including myself, because what we were living was what we've come to know now as a network social movement. These are social movements that have emerged over the last 10, 15 years. You might remember the Occupy Wall Street movement in the United States, or the Arab Spring, or the Indignado movements in Spain. And these are movements that are different from the movements that we used to have in the past because they are much more decentralized and leaderless. In fact, there are some characteristics of these network social movements, which is their distrust on political parties, so therefore they cannot channel their interest through traditional party lines. They distrust the media, so also, there are movements that tend to not believe what the television tells or, what the newspaper writes. They reject formal organization, they reject traditional leadership, and as a result, these are movements that struggle to articulate their grievances. Of course, by Sunday, everybody in Chile knew that something happened. People were upset. People had, burned, the subway, and subways are not supposed to burn. People had rioted and had looted a number of supermarkets. They had burned buildings. But what did they really want? Nobody knew, and neither did I. At that time, actually, I was not living in Chile. I was living in Boston. As they said in my introduction, I was, for a long time at MIT, and I had a software company in Boston, and I was looking at this through social media. I was looking at this through, the online television channels and whatnot. And I started to think about, is there something that I can do to help understand what's happening there? The country was out of control. The president has lost control of the country. They had called a curfew, and we didn't know what was happening. So what I decided to do is, with my software company, which had offices in Chile, was to create a platform to try to understand what was that people really wanted. So this was something that happened really quickly. The week after this revolution started, I sent a WhatsApp, to a group of colleagues that work on a think tank in Chile. And there were a bunch of experts. There were people that used to be ministers. There were people that used to be, in politics. And I asked them, do you have any idea what is going on? my company and I will build a platform to try to compare different policy proposals, like a digital democracy system that allows people to not prioritize over candidates, but actually over issues, and we need to populate this. And I start getting tons and tons and tons of proposals that help us, build a platform. So on October 24 of 2019, with the people, at DataWheel, we eventually were able to put together this digital democracy system that we launched, and that became extremely viral during this active time of mobilizations. So what was this about? What platform did we create? When thinking about a digital democracy system, you sometimes, want to build on some of the things that we know or that we have learned from the past. And what we did was a system that was based on some old ideas on preference elicitation that come from social choice theory and from psychology. This platform called Chilecracia was based on this law of comparative judgment, which was an idea introduced by Louis Thurston, an American psychologist in 1927. Thurston was one of these weird psychologists that had actually come not directly from psychology, but from mechanical engineering. He was a mechanical engineer that once he went to teach mechanical engineering as a professor, he realized that what was hard was not solving these engineering problems, but making sure that the students learned them. And that motivated him to eventually, pursue a career in psychology. He took a PhD at the University of Chicago, and in 1927, he developed this law of comparative judgment because he believed that many of the things that we believe are qualitative could also be quantified if we actually know how to do it. So what he did is he grabbed a list, of different crimes, printed all possible pairs on some pieces of paper, and asked the students to underline the crime that they consider worse on each pair, and that allowed them to construct a quantitative scale of the severity of each one of these crimes. He was able to transform the qualitative into the quantitative by using this wisdom of the crowd. And we have done that before. We have done that, for instance, to help quantify people's perception of urban environments. So what we could do here is we could grab these proposals. We could grab, in this case, more than 90 proposals that we had collected and put them on a platform in which people could prioritize. They wouldn't be voting in the sense that they would be choosing an alternative, but they would be prioritizing, they would be having to select in the context of a trade-off in which they have to tell us what is more important to them. Is it more important for them that maybe, we should increase the minimum wage? Because maybe this is an economic crisis and it's a crisis of living conditions. Or is this a political crisis? Are people demanding a new constitution? Well, in this platform, you were required to make those trade-offs. And because we had many alternatives, we were able to run thousands of head-to-head simultaneous. And because we had, hundreds of alternatives, we were able to run thousands of simultaneous head-to-head elections. So one way to think about this platform is that what we were doing is we're taking policy proposals, these policy proposals that we had grabbed from experts, and we're putting them on cards. Okay? And we were creating a stack of cards with the priorities of the population. On the top, we had the things that people cared the most about, and the bottom, the things that people care the least about. And we were giving, through their phones, everybody had now the option to move the cards on the deck. They could move the cards up or they could move the cards down. And we had thousands of people moving these cards up or down the deck, helping us figure out what was actually driving the revolution. What were the grievances that people were trying to resolve? So my original idea when we started this, and as you remember, we started this really in the spur of the moment, was that maybe by doing this, we could find some areas of consensus. And maybe if we could find the areas of consensus, we could support a constructive dialogue. My idea was that, look, sure, in Chile, people disagree on a lot of things, but there must be some things that they agree on, and maybe those things that they agree on are the things that we should be talking about. And that was the idea that we used to motivate the construction, of this tool. An idea that later I'll show you was actually wrong, because we managed to do that. We managed to achieve what we had set out to do. We created a platform. Thousands of people participated, actually hundreds of thousands of people participated. We got millions of preferences from the population, and we could create rankings of the things that people agreed on. People, for example, demanded the minimum wage to be equal or the minimum pension to be equal or larger than the minimum wage, or to reduce the value-added tax for medicine, and so forth. And for example, people didn't care about the legalization of marijuana at that time. That was not a cause for the conflict. And even though that sounds irrelevant, it validates the idea that the tool is working. Yes, because it's showing that what should be relevant is also relevant in the context of these results. And the platform, as I told you, was released on October 24th. We released several versions of the platform. It was on the news, it was in the cover of a newspaper, it was on many times on television. It was to the point that actually it was being discussed by senators of the Republic as, are these the exits that we have to the conflict that we have at hand? And that was interesting because it brought different types of people. When the platform was first released, it went viral among the youth, among people that were active in social media and that were involved in the movement. When it went into television, it became viral among older population, people that were at home watching, Chile burn on TV, and we could collect all of their preference. We had a really wide segment of the population that was participating. But like everything that goes up, it must go down. And what happened is that, as the platform kept on going and the temperature of society did not go down and the revolution kept on going and the conflict between the police and the people on the street kept on growing, people basically eventually turned against us and, the platform, had its day. But we had maybe learned something. We had learned that maybe, our original idea was not correct. So actually, after the platform was, out of the game, was out of the race, I started to look at the data in a little bit more detail. And I said, how about instead of trying to find the agreements, maybe I'm trying to instead look at what are the things that people in the left want and people in the right want. Maybe this is not a story about what people agree on, but maybe what people are fighting on are the things that they really disagree strongly about. And in the platform, we had a small survey in which people could self-report if they identified with the political left or the political right. And we could grab only the votes from people that have self-identified with the left, make a ranking, and only the votes for people that have self-identified with the right, and we could make a ranking. And as you can see, there is a correlation. There is an area of agreement. All that diagonal in the center is an area of agreement. But if you look on the top left, for instance, of that chart, there it says Asamblea Constituyente, that means Constitutional Assembly. That's the number one issue, or number two issue. It's a very high ranked issue among people on the left. It's the bottom issue among people on the right. So we find actually, sure, people agreed on the pensions being bad and needed to be readjusted, but that was never going to get any political traction. Why? Because people agree on that. So there's no traction on things that people agree on. The new constitution, the Constitutional Assembly, that got a lot of traction. Why? Because some people loved it and some people really hated it. It was a really polarizing issue. So what I started to realize here is that we had not only created a tool that allowed people to participate democratically in the context of voting or revealing preferences over policy issues rather than candidates, but we had a way to also identify what are things that were dividing the population, a thermometer for divisiveness. So we started to wonder what was going on. We had a few problems that we needed to solve first. The first one was that actually when we did this, as I told you, we did this literally from one day to the next at my company, DataWheel, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with people that also were working on DataWheel in Chile. We started doing this project on a Wednesday and we released it on a Thursday. It was that quick. And because of that, it was a project that was done by a group of citizens, not by a group of academics. So what we needed to do is to start over and collect data by asking all of the permits that you need to do when you do data with humans. So what we did is we started again here in France, and we developed new versions of the platform, for France and for Brazil, that were targeted at the recent presidential elections. So we did a platform in France and a platform in Brazil that behaved more or less similarly. We had proposals that were policy issues, that people could rank and that people could prioritize over, And what we did here, though, was we introduced one innovation that I thought was quite interesting, which was that instead of taking the proposals from a group of experts, we took them from the official government programs from the candidates. So in France, there were 12 candidates in the last election. We had a lawyer go through all of the government programs and reduce, the proposals into relatively, small snippets of text, so we could populate this platform and create what we call a collaborative government program builder. People were building, their own government program by combining proposals from the different candidates without knowing which proposal came from which candidate, which make it also kind of like a little bit interesting from an experimental perspective. So we could learn a few things, but to be able to unpack those things, we needed some theoretical framework, and the theoretical framework is that of social choice theory. Social choice theory is a very old branch of mathematics and that focuses on how to aggregate individual preferences into collective decisions. It can be traced back to the work of Nicolas of Cusa or Jean-Charles Borda or Nicolas de Condorcet, who was actually the president of the Second Assembly, during the French Revolution. And this is about how you would aggregate preference that people elicit, let's say on a paper election, but also would apply to a digital election, so that you can create a collective decision based on the preferences that have been revealed. The thing is, there are many ways in which you can count votes and add votes to decide on who's the winner of an election. For example, Borda is this idea of like rank-based voting. You want to assign points based on the number of other candidates that each candidate win. Condorcet, likes the idea that the winner of an election should be the one that wins every possible election that involves only two candidates. So you have these measures of agreement, you have this measure of consensus, and what mathematicians for a long time have been doing is trying to figure out which ones are best, which ones would produce an election that is fair, or would have a desirable set of properties, and this is what is called axiomatic social choice theory. So you have certain ideas of what would be good, as a property for an election. For instance, that the Condorcet winner is the winner of the election could be one of them. So the one that would win any election involving two candidates is also the one that wins an election involving, let's say, 7 candidates. Or you want the independence of irrelevant alternatives. For instance, you don't want a losing candidate to change the outcome of an election. Yeah? If there's a candidate that was going to lose, basically is not a very popular candidate and doesn't run, you want the election to remain the same. And you try to find a voting rule that satisfies these properties. The problem is that actually is impossible. There is an impossibility theorem that was unveiled by Kenneth Arrow. He won the Nobel Prize eventually in 1972, that shows that in any election that you have 3 or more candidates, you cannot satisfy simultaneously these 4 axiomatic properties. Like election that will have an independence of irrelevant alternatives, meaning that if you remove a non-winning candidate, it doesn't change, or unrestricted domain, for instance, which means that any possible set of preferences can be expressed. Now, in our case, we understand that you cannot have it all, but here we're trying to create or test or run or explore systems in the real world. So even if you cannot have it all, we might be curious about how close we can get to that. Because an election that is 99% Condorcet efficient is technically not Condorcet efficient, but it might be much more interesting than one that is only 20% Condorcet efficient. Yes? So you might get close to perfection even if you never get to it, and that's something that it's an empirical question at the end of the day. It depends not on the mathematical properties, but also on the structure of the preferences that are elicited by the population. So we ran this for France, and we could see, for example, that people in France care a lot about renewable energies or increasing personnel in public hospitals. They care also about the minimum wage. They don't care that much, or they don't prioritize policies about removing the TV license fee or protecting hunting and fishing rights. And we could run this in Brazil, and we see that there also the minimum wage is something that people care about, or an investment in their healthcare system is also something that is important to Brazilians. But this is sort of like this first measure. This is the Condorcet winner, or the board account, or the Copeland score. These are the proposals that people agree on or that support to a greater amount. But what we could do now is also start exploring this with this idea that we had at that time, this idea of divisiveness. The first thing that we could do here is we could see if the people on the left or the people on the right actually supported the proposals from the candidates on the left or on the right, because we knew where the proposals were coming from. And yes, there is a diagonal element. In Brazil, that's very clear. People that intended to vote for Lula were more likely to select proposals that were in Lula's program, and the same with Bolsonaro. But the off-diagonal element is not that bad. There's like a almost three-quarter agreement with the proposal of the opposite candidate. In France, we find something that is a little bit different, which is, people do tend to, agree with proposals from candidates that come from their same sector, but the people on the right seems to be more accepting of the proposals from the left than the people of the left from the proposals of the right. There's kind of like an asymmetry that we find here in the case of France. And this is something that we could extract now that we have these systems. We could also explore that divisiveness. For example, here we have people that self-reported being from the right in France, people that self-reported being from the left in France. The correlation is not great, it's only 33%, so there is divisiveness, they think differently. For example, people that are more from the left, they supported more the proposal to prohibit salary differences of more than 1 to 20 in a company. That's a lefty proposal. People that were more from the right, they were more supportive of the restoration of border control by leaving the Schengen Agreement. But we could also look at divisiveness not only in terms of political orientation, but for instance, by age. People that were younger and that participated in this platform supported more the idea of ending the 35-hour working week. People that were older in the platform, they care more about real estate taxes and removing these real estate and wealth taxes from their main residence. So different dimensions, help us split the population differently and tells us about different forms of divisiveness. In fact, divisiveness, we realized that it was a multidimensional phenomena that could involve multiple splits of the population. People from the cities versus people that live in rural areas, younger versus older, people that were highly educated versus people that were not so highly educated, and so forth. And we could even generalize the idea of divisiveness by averaging over multiple ways in which you would split the population to be able to develop a score that no longer depended on self-reported data on people's political affiliation. Okay, so now using this formula, we can grab the data that we collected in these platforms, and we can calculate a divisiveness score for a proposal without knowing if the people that participated self-identify with the left, the right, they were young or old or anything. And what we find when we do that is first that divisiveness provides information that is absent, that is orthogonal, that is uncorrelated to the one of their respective aggregated function. So let's say you're using a Condorcet rule to determine the winner, you're using a board account to determine the winner, that gives you information that is uncorrelated with information that you obtained by this divisiveness score. So for instance, in the data that we collected for France, two proposals that have a similar level of support, create a constituent assembly to pass the Sixth Republic, or increase number of doctors in rural underserved areas, have very different divisiveness score. The idea of increasing a number of doctors in rural underserved areas is not controversial. The idea of creating a constituent assembly to pass the Sixth Republic is very controversial, even though in the first vector they score similarly. In Brazil, we find the same. Encouraging research on medicine is not controversial compared to the preservation of cultural and demarcation of indigenous lands, even though they have a same level of prioritization within the population. So finally, what we could do is we could explore, these axiomatic properties in the context of an election involving multiple alternatives. For instance, in the case of France, we had 120 different alternatives, 120 different policy proposals. And we could look at the Condorcet efficiency or the pairwise efficiency of the election. In this matrix, each row represents an alternative, an issue, a proposal, and each column also represents an alternative, and the color of the cell of the matrix tells you the percentage of times that the proposal in the row beats the proposal in the column. Yes? And this matrix has like a beautiful gradient if you think about it. The proposal number 1 tends to beat proposal, number, let's say 50 a lot of the times. But doesn't beat proposal number 2, by such a large amount. And we can see how many times we find a violation because we can sort the proposals using the ranking from the top to the bottom. And we observe a violation when a proposal that is ranked lower beats one that is ranked higher. And those violations are there, but they're not that many. Actually, the efficiency of this matrix is about 81%, meaning that 81% of the time, or a little bit more, the proposals that are ranked higher always beat the proposals that are ranked lower than them. We could also look how robust this election was to the independence of relative alternatives. So we could remove one of the proposals and all of the data associated with it, run again, the scores, and see if the election changed. And sure, sometimes things change. Sometimes, proposal number 30 and number 31 would flip. But proposal number 1 never changed. Proposal number 2 never changed. The top never changed. The top was always extremely stable. So even though in principle, this is an axiomatic property that, it's not always possible to satisfy, in practice, at least for the top proposals, it was being satisfied with relatively sparse, data. And we'd also explore this a little bit further, and this to me is where things get interesting, because what we could do is we could now take this matrix that summarized the preference of the entire population, and we can decompose it using, this singular value decomposition, using these eigenvectors. And what we could learn is that actually the measure of agreement is encoded in that first matrix. That when you observe, these preferences of the population, there is one component that is the one that is expressing these measures of agreement, these Condorcet winners or these board accounts and so forth. And then these measures of divisiveness are higher order vectors in this decomposition. And because they're higher order vectors in this decomposition, you're always going to find them there, and they're a natural generalization. What this is telling us is that, well, people have been looking at social choice theory for more than 200 years. But they were always looking at it in the context of elections involving few candidates, and they were always looking at the axiomatic properties of how to determine the winner of those elections. And through this very circuitous path, we got to actually discover that there is another way to aggregate the data that doesn't tell us about the winner, and that tends to be important for elections involving multiple alternatives, not just a couple of candidates. And that this measure, what it tells us is what are the issues that divide the population. And we can now learn how to extract, these measures of divisiveness that we arrived to through a circuitous path of discovery. Thank you.
Okay, well, I would like to invite all the speakers back up, please. As you can sit over there in these very fancy chairs. And Yves-Alexandre de Montjoie, our moderator for tonight. So we will start by a couple of questions that maybe Yves-Alexandre thought of. And then you are invited, of course, to ask your burning questions.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir.
Perfect. Doesn't seem to be working.
1, 2, 3.
I don't know if it is working. Okay, now it's working. Perfect, sounds good. Thanks a lot, everyone, for the 3 quite different and fascinating talks and perspective on AI. I think we'll take a few questions that I received from the Collegium and then open the questions to the room. Maybe in order, I think the first one, Antoinette, listening to you talk, I was feeling quite a lot of worries in a sense in terms of where AI is taking us, like a sense of unease at the idea of
stochastic, probabilistic nature of those machines and the limited information that ultimately they rely on to make a prediction and ultimately a decision. But are we human better, right? Are we human better at predicting? Are we human better at making decisions? Are we less biased? Or do you see some ways in which human and machine can work together and actually achieve a better outcome?
Yeah, we are certainly not better. We are different. The way we are producing meaning is completely different. In fact, algorithms are techniques of production of meaning, which are different in the sense that meaning is produced on the basis not of norms or human prejudices or habits or the way human beings recognize things that they have seen before, but on the basis of computation of data and data which have been previously rendered amnesic of their conditions of production, so which are completely deterritorialized or decontextualized, and so on. So, in fact, they are producing meaning from the detection of patterns, which are in fact correlations, which have been detected in huge amounts of big and fast data. And this way of producing meaning is completely divorced from the way human beings are producing meaning. So, of course, they can be, I would say, complementary, of course, and the best way to deal with human intelligence, if we call it intelligence, despite the fact that algorithms don't understand anything. In fact, the difference is that algorithms are able to metabolize and to synthesize a wide diversity of data, but they are unable to give really understanding or meaning in the sense of human meaning to the result of that synthesis. Whereas human beings, we are situated in space, so we have a limited view. We don't have a view from nowhere. We are biased in many ways, but we are capable of interpreting and adding meaning to the world. So the best way would be, of course, to augment human intelligence with artificial intelligence or artificial communication, but knowing the biases of both. And in fact, humans are biased, but artificial intelligences, as we call them, are biased as well, because they depend indeed on the logistics or the materiality of all the sensors that capture data, and sensors are unevenly distributed in space. They depend also of data which are taken as in fact as facts, but data are never facts. Data are effects of what happens in society, and society is full of results of relations of power and domination, but these powers and dominations are not recorded as data. What is recorded as data is is only the result of that. I give you an example. If you have an algorithm that is being used by well-meaning employers who don't want to discriminate against some people, and because they know that people prefer working with people who are like them or who resemble them. So sometimes, in order to be more objective, virtuous employers want to use algorithms, recommendation algorithms. But these algorithms, they have been trained on the data coming from all the sector in which they are active. And if there are huge discriminations, for example, against women, for example, or against people of certain ethnic origin in that sector, the result of these discriminations are passively recorded as digital data. And that simple recording into digital data doesn't purge, doesn't evacuate all these discriminations, but it naturalizes them. Because, you know, algorithm work, machine learning, algorithm of machine learning, work not on a deductive logic, they are purely inductive. That means that they don't keep any kind of attention to the causes of the phenomena they record. What they only metabolize the effects. So what happens then is that despite the fact that algorithms appear more objective because they don't work with the visual episteme through which we are predisposed to judge about performances and people and so on. They appear, well, they metabolize numbers, they metabolize digital signals. They appear more objective because they don't see whether I'm a woman or a man or the color of my skin. But in fact, it has been proven that instead of neutralizing, of dispensing society from prejudices and so on, in fact, they tend to reinforce the prejudices and so on. I give you just another...
We'll come back to the fairness question.
Yes.
Maybe just to kind of, get a conversation starting with, all three panelists. I think, Olga, to be honest, it's like, it's quite fascinating to me as an engineer by training to see you actually take, AI as a tool to actually create and kind of turn potentially what people see as, cold numbers into something that actually, seem to take life. I think AI has been evolving quite dramatically in the past, 6 months to 2 years. In particular, I think we've all started using, ChatGPT, stable diffusion, et cetera, especially when it comes to text. What are you the most excited about when it comes to, future creation using AI? What do you envision, becoming the next big?
Thank you very much for this question. In fact, it's very important, I think, because now we have to remember that art is not a production of beautiful objects. Art, it is a kind of research. And when we use a tool, when we work with a tool, it is to explore this tool, to try to move its limits, to understand what is it made for. What is it made against? What we can do with this? What we don't have to do with this? And more the tool we have is powerful and complicated, more it is exciting to work with. And artificial intelligence is this kind of tool. So we have a lot of work as artists to push the borders of this tool.
Thanks a lot. I think, César, you showed in your paper divisiveness, to be kind of orthogonal to the current, preference aggregation system that we use. So in Belgium, we have upcoming elections across, region, federal, European level. It usually does take us, at least at federal level, a long time to get a government after elections. How do we use your research, or could your research help, actually speed things up, get people together, make something more efficient?
So at the moment, we don't know for sure, but we're actually setting up experiments and we're trying to develop a collaborative network to explore that. So, for instance, with colleagues that work on citizen assemblies, you probably have heard of citizen assemblies in which, let's say, 1,000 people from the population are selected at random, or a few hundred, and they're asked to debate and deliberate. The question is, can we augment this type of instances using this type of technologies to understand better what are the issues that need to be deliberated on, or how do we allocate time to deliberation in each one of those issues? so that we make progress on them. We don't know if there's going to be an effect, because at the end this is an empirical question. We could do this and maybe people at the assembly just end up more upset at each other and it doesn't work out. Or maybe, you have to moderate it in a very particular way to help it engage, and we need to discover what that way is. So I think there is an empirical experimental agenda that needs to come forward that involves this form of democratic innovations and that tries to combine these different trends that now exist: citizen assemblies, digital participation, different ways of maybe recording or aggregating the information that is being collected in these instances. And my hope is that through some combination of that, we're going to find ways in which we can have a better combination of both deliberation, which I would consider like opinion formation. We want people to be able to change their minds during the process, and also then that preference aggregation that happens after the deliberation, where people, are going to express, their opinion at that moment.
Thanks. So before we open the floor for questions, I think, reading the press, there was the AI summit in the UK this week, in which Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was basically emphasizing what they see as, or something they call the existential risk of AI, this fear of a Terminator or Skynet-like scenario in which AI starts, self-replicating and take over. Is this something that you are worried about?
No, in fact, I think it's really a distraction. Calling to existential risks are not there. No, the true existential risk that there is for the moment is climate change, it's erosion of biodiversity, it's probably war. All these are, it's not a matter of data or algorithms. That's real life, that's materiality of life. And I think moreover that the promotion of existential risks in a way of framing the issues in terms of existential risks is a kind of advertisement of powers that in fact AI don't have at all. We don't have for the moment, and I'm not sure about that, but for the moment, the idea that AI will really become intelligent and really autonomous is something. It's a science fiction phantasm for the moment. That is, it's a huge publicity they are doing for themselves, including in that moratory that they were asking for, But I think the true risks for society for the moment is the difficulty that people, for example, working for platforms as Uber drivers, the difficulty they have to collectively negotiate with the platform in order to increase their wage or increase their conditions of work and so on. And these are, or the issues that we just mentioned before, the issues of discrimination or naturalization through digitalization of the effects of domination, which become, because of the black box, which become very difficult to contest, and because also the judgments made by machines allow for a very individualized judgments, very individualized, not classifications, but attribution of risk scores, for example, or performance, future performance scores, which are really individualized, meaning that the people who have a bad score, for example, cannot organize collectively with other people who would have had the same bad score, because they would share the same, they would be in the same category, because categories disappear. Categories which are individually and collectively recognizable disappear and are replaced instead by clusterings that people cannot recognize at all. So there is no collective struggle, collective action possible against these kinds of things. All these kinds of issues are real issues, and they are actual issues, and these are the issues we have today to deal with.
No, yeah, I agree. I do think that in a world in which we're worrying about Skynet, things must be pretty good because there's a lot of people that cannot afford to be worrying about that. You know, there's people, of course, you know, that we know now in the Middle East or in Ukraine or in, you know, many parts of the developing world that they cannot afford to be worrying about these type of things. So I do think that it's self-aggrandizing. You know, it's a way to, like, in some sense, you know, power comes from fear in many ways, but it's not from you inspiring fear on others. Is by you inspiring protection from the fear that you induce on others. You know? And therefore, by calling AI an existential risk, that provides power to those that says that they would protect us from that risk. Yeah. And there is a self-aggrandizing game that I think, you know, we shouldn't be playing, but that it's very popular on Twitter for some reason.
For some reason.
So maybe to take a few questions from the Collegium. So maybe one question for you, César, to start with is, you know, do you think that there is a world in which AI can predict so well what we need that we don't need to hold elections anymore?
I don't think so. I think, like, basically what we want to do is try to achieve collective intelligence, you know, and to achieve collective intelligence, we need to solve problems of interface. In a way, that's, I think, the problem that we have been solving for thousands of years, if not more. Usually, you know, we tend to be relatively good at understanding what's happening at a micro level. When you have a group of 4 or 5 people, you can read each other's intentions, you understand each other's personalities, you know what people want or how they're going to react. You know, you get to 100 people, that gets really hard. You know, anybody that has run a company knows that. You get to thousands, you get to millions, that gets impossible. You know, you are in Harry Seldon territory. You have to, like, really now, you know, think about, you know, a science that I don't think we have. And what we've done for a long time is develop ways to augment our intelligence, you know, to help us solve those coordination problems. The printing press. It's very hard to imagine modern democracy without the printing revolution. Because the printing revolution allowed people to communicate, you know, ideas over longer periods of time, longer distances. The same with the telegraph. Like, even the idea of, like, the weather, you know, was hard to imagine before the telegraph because people didn't know that there was different weather 2 hours away and that weather was coming your way and whatnot. And the television, the radio, they changed politics again. And the internet is, of course, doing that, and artificial intelligence is going to do that again. Now the question is, are we going to be able to figure out a way to use it so that we can augment our collective intelligence? So far, I think the ways that we have been using the modern communication technologies have not been productive in that direction. You know, we tend to augment content that is, you know, polarizing. We have developed a political system that I think is more and more catering to people with, you know, really large egomania personalities, you know, that are able to compete in this really challenging environment in which you have to be exposed all of the time. Can we do better? Can we use the technology to do a system in which we really leverage collective intelligence in a more distributed form? I think it is not the most likely option, but I think it is an option that eventually we could develop.
Maybe a short comment.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very interesting question because it raises the question of the nature of what politics is. And in fact, I don't think politics can be reduced to seismography, you know, just registering preferences of individuals on the mode of the production of insights. It gives insights, but insights and knowledge are things that are really different. For example, when there was a scandal with Cambridge Analytica or Nation Builder, you know, the way that these algorithms have been used to render political marketing much more optimal, meaning that allowing each politician to fine-tune its communication to target specific voters, and especially those who were less decided, more hesitant, and so on, and to target the specific portions of the electorate in order to, that were insights. And in fact, there is a huge difference between insights and knowledge. An insight gains value and utility the least it is shared. in a community. The least it is common. Whereas knowledge, as researchers know, gains in value, in robustness, and in collective utility when it is shared. The problem is when politicians use these kinds of seismography of social networks and so on in order to behave like seismographs, adapting not their project, because there is no need to have a project anymore, suffice to adapt to the immanence of the first order preferences of voters. Politics is something else. Politics is building collective knowledge through conversations, through being exposed to others in a space where everything has not been fine-tuned to one's own preference. It's a space of exposure to things that have not been fine-tuned for us, and it's a collective invention. It's a collective invention about the thing that concerns it's not a juxtaposition of individual interests. It's exactly the opposite. It's the building beyond individual interest and the changing of individual preferences, first order preference, into preference of second order, which attune better to the common, to the collective, I think.
Thanks. So I think we're going to open the room for questions. So we have 2 mics in the room. So if you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask a question. It should be working. Yeah.
Thank you for your conference. So I have many questions. Sorry. So
we're going to have
about
to do it
about the artist, you use AI, and you say that it's just like a toy. But I see a different, because before, when you use a pen, something like that, that's still not life, you see? When you use AI, that's different, because AI make the oeuvre. Do you understand what I mean? So I don't know who is the artist. Is that the person they use AI, or is that AI they make the oeuvre, or is that corporations? That's my question for you. Sorry.
Thank you for this question. AI is a tool. This is a tool made by humans. So in my case, the art I develop is in the field of art and science. So almost all my creation are in fact the collaborative creation, the co-creations with my scientific partners. So when I use AI, sometimes it is not just AI. I don't go to Mid-Journey. I work with scientists who develop this AI, and these scientists are my co-authors in the work. Humans, not tools.
Okay, so we might take, I think there's a question there. Oops.
It was quite an observation. What I quite understood, it was the fact that human relations need a third person, and it was quite a sort of triangulation where IE tried to find a consensus or to underline a divisiveness, and I found it, I compare it to the systemic approach, where it seems that in order to agree to or to not agree to something, human needs this triangulation.
No, so I think it goes a little bit into what Antoinette was talking about, which is this ability of not just having participation, but having participation in the context of a deliberation that allows you to move your preferences from the first order preference, the things that you want, and the things that you want once you take into account what other people might want or how other people might behave, those second order preferences. And doing that is really hard because we tend to have a view of the world usually that is very local, that is very small, that is very biased. So the question of how we make collective decisions, even though in principle I agree with Antoinette, we can say that is the purpose of having these systems. In practice, it might not work quite easily or like that. And we tend to break it down differently. Like in a company, sometimes, the boss, the founder, they're the ones that make the final decision, and that's how we solve that problem, The boss is the one that gets to decide, and if they make good decisions, the company might continue to grow. If they make bad decisions, the company might disappear, might be replaced by others. When we're now in a public setting, we don't want to delegate as much to an authority, at least when we're in a democracy. When we're in a monarchy, we might have, a similar system, and there are countries, today that still have monarchies that operate like that. So is AI a new way to try to think about disaggregation? This is an old problem. Like you think about Condorcet before the French Revolution was thinking about how to add these votes because there has been this belief that there might be a way to have disaggregation to help us understand what is it that we might want in the context of maybe even knowing what other ones want. AI gives us a new opportunity to explore that aggregation in a way that it's much more articulate and nuanced than anything that we had before. And I think as scientists, we have the responsibility to explore that option and to figure out if there's any way in which we could make it work to improve the system. I don't think that where we are is the end of history. I think there might be something beyond this, and this might be the gate.
Thanks. So we're getting close to the finish time. Are there any remaining burning questions? Raise your hand if you do. Yeah, so we have, I see one, two. Maybe we'll take the two questions at once, and then Mireille will close the session.
Thank you. You just talk about exploration, and I think that's a very important point. In fact, the real risk with AI is the fact that you are getting to a perfect world, a world that is optimized based on previous data. And as was said in the first talk, the problem is that then you lose what the future could get in the system, and actually in the biological systems that exist, and in particular for human beings, the way we go for that is to decide to take the wrong decision sometime. And that's actually exploration. We try something that we know is not the perfect decision, but that is necessary to explore other solutions that would actually reveal data that are not available for the moment. I would like to know what you think about this way of thinking about exploration.
Yeah.
So we'll take the second question. We'll take both questions at once, and then we can...
Okay, the second question?
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentations. My question regarded the level of polarization that you get after you take a poll. So I was wondering whether pre and post debate you were able to test if the level of how to explain? Sorry.
Divisiveness? Yep.
Yes, that you get before and after a debate changes depending on the debate and discussions that a group can have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's an easy question, so I think I can answer quickly, and then we go to that one, which is a little bit more philosophical. So in the case of Chile, that we had a platform that ran for several weeks with a large volume of participation, we were able to run different waves. Basically the wave that we ran things in Chile was kind of funny, like all of the proposals that were in the bottom of the list at the end of the week. They were relegated, and then we brought in proposals that were suggested by the participants, and they made it into the Premier League, and then they would run again. And we could see week after week, and the preference would change because we were at a time in which the news cycle was literally like 15 seconds. Everything was moving so fast, and you could see preferences, changing over time, which to me, it's a very important question because when we have these acts of participation, like whether we want it or not, whether we want to idealize democracy as this deliberative, beauty in which we try to find compromises, the reality is that in most countries, we have to vote a few times and we have to stick with the decision of our votes for a long time in between. And those preferences can change much faster than the speed at which we're changing things. And we might have a good reason to, stick to a plan for a while, to allow time for execution and so forth. But in the case of Chile, which, is the one that we were looking at, for instance, one way that the conflict was solved was to start a constitutional process in a blank page. That was voted with like 78% approval to start a constitutional process. And then the constitution that was written was rejected with more than 62% of people rejecting it, and now we're on the process of rejecting a second attempt to write a constitution. Is that first referendum still valid after you reject the two constitutions that were opened by that process? What is the lifespan of a decision that is made in one of the systems? These are things that, to me, they're empirical questions that we have yet to explore because we still have a very 18th, 19th century way of thinking about this in which we're moving with very small frequencies of refresh or updating, when in reality society might be moving faster, we might be changing preferences, and we're not able to consider it right now because of the way that we participate. Yeah.
So maybe the second question, Antoinette?
Yeah, which was the first one? Okay. Thank you very much. I really like that idea of taking the wrong decision, because that's precisely what a judge does all the time. A judge, when deciding on a case, he knows that his decision is not perfect. Why? Because giving a decision of justice is deciding against a background of undecidability. In fact, it's always undecidable, and a judge always knows that even the law is not perfect justice. Law and justice, applying perfectly the law, is never completely just, because justice is a dialectical concept. It's something that is, if you wish, it's a principle of perfectibility of the social. It's not something that is already there, that is already in the data. It's not something that you can find through optimization on the basis of available data. It's something that will be added to the law, and which will be, and each decision of a judge indeed approximates an ideal of justice that is never present, that is always only an approximation. So, but the wrong decision, as all legal decisions are always wrong, they can be they're approximation of justice, but they are not as such completely true. The notion of truth and falsity doesn't apply to justice decision, but that wrong decision allows for the contestability of the decision. That's the reason why law is a dogmatic system, but it's a dogmatic that is conscious of its own dogmatic essence or reality, and therefore the law organizes itself the conditions and procedures for its own overcoming, for its own contestability. And I think that's exactly why we cannot really respond to the call of the sirens of algorithmic totality, of algorithmic optimization. Optimization and the perfect decision from the perspective of an optimizing mind may be exactly the opposite of a just decision.
But I would contest the idea that equating AI to optimization, because
yes, it's reduction.
Exactly, AI.
It's not only that.
And this is I have a book called How Humans Judge Machines, that I published a couple of years ago with MIT Press. And what I do is I compare how people react to a scenario when the one that makes the mistake is a machine or a human. Because at the end, is this idea of perfectibility. Are you doing any better? Are you improving over the current state of the system? And the nice thing about AI is that AI is not like the algorithms that we used to have, in which you get some inputs, you run them through a black box, and you always get the same output. Go and play with ChatGPT, go and play with Runway ML. You're going to give the same prompt, you're going to get different answers every time, and you're going to get variations over those answers. Like over the last summer, I had a lot of fun running the scenarios from the New York Times has this section called The Ethicist. And there's an ethicist that answers, and you run them through the AI, and you would get, like pretty nice responses to the dilemmas that people were presenting, but they were always different, and if you run them 10 times, you get 10 different ones. And then the AI is hungry for your feedback. So it incorporates this idea of making mistakes, and it incorporates this idea of variation. It's not a system that is every input would always provide the same response. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I told for too long. Yes, it metabolizes contingency, and it's their learning system. But yet, learning systems, they are not the same as the metabolism, the metabolism of justice. Because. When a judge takes a decision that you can contest, what you can bring on the table through language is not data. It's something that comes from the materiality of your own singular situation, which the algorithm cannot know about. It's a way of, in fact, articulating the computation because the judge also computes. There is an element of calculation, which is the law, the rule of law. But the judge will apply that rule of law, but not blindly. He will also have to listen to the way and the singular way that the individuals, through language, give account of their own situation, material, history, and for their reasons, also for their motivations, and so on. And that's how law progresses. That's how law remains alive. That's how law, for example, all the story of the abolition of segregation in the U.S., for example, there was a lot of judicial cases where, in fact, it was not an optimization and learning of an algorithmic system. It was because people disobeyed willfully in order to contest the law, and that's how social progress can arise also. And algorithmic systems are conservative, in a way.
No, they can be contested. Yeah, you could have that dialogue, and you can put the input, and you can try it. It's an empirical question at the end. It's not. Yeah.
You cannot give account of the reasons why you decided to not comply to with a law which you found unjust, for example.
If you can do it with language to a human, you can do it with language to a machine right now.
Not so easily.
Unless we're talking about a language that is not written language.
It is written language.
Yeah. I think on this note, we reached the end of the panel. We proved César's theory to be correct. We managed to find areas of disagreement, which was the goal. So first of all, I'd like to really deeply thank the three of you for the amazing talks and your participation in this panel. So if you can get a round of applause for our panelists. And I will let Mireille conclude the evening.
It's getting late, so I'll not keep you for a long time. I just want to say a few thank yous. First, I want to thank our funders that you can see on the slide behind me. So the Loterie Nationale, les Instituts Solvay, and the FNRS. Without their funding, we couldn't be here tonight. I also want to thank the team at Flagey that, well, with their help, everything ran very smoothly, I think. I also want to thank the Académie royale de Belgique, most particularly Dr. Nicolas Simon for all his help with logistical questions. Of course, I want to thank the speakers for their presentations, also for this very spirited debate, and the artists that are hiding in the loge, as well as Yves-Alexandre for moderating this debate. I also want to thank the members of the Collegium, so all of them, of course, but more particularly the ones that helped make tonight the night it was. So Émilie Caspar, Charles Doyen, Mithia de Rinks, Catherine Elsen, Nathan Goldman, Florian Kinnick et Anne-Sophie Radermacher. Merci à vous. And finally, one huge thank you to all of you who stayed until now with us. I invite you to go have a drink, continue this spirited discussion, and also maybe interact with the power struggle video of Olga. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you.